3, 2, 1. So what we're looking at here, and this is a couple of problems in my graph. What's the first problem? You haven't used the rules, not exactly straight, so none of my data will be perfectly correct. We're going to look at how we set this data up and talk about what's going on, and talk about the difference between scatter plots and time series. What have I got currently on the board? Scatter plot. Okay, how do I make that a time series graph? Connect the dots and talk about what's going on with that. If this was a scatter plot, what could I apply to it? A line of best fit. Which data set would that not be appropriate for? Which one of those do you think a line of best fit wouldn't suit? Why wouldn't it suit China? Start size. So the first thing I should do is have a legend at the top, because someone who's reading my graph needs to know what's going on. So China is my... Oh, that's not where that line goes. China is my red. And we connect our dots to make this a time series. Why are we making a time series? Because that's what the graph says it wants. We go through and we connect our dots. Now I want you to look at China very closely whilst I am going through the next data. The next one's Ireland. Going through and connecting the dots here. So I put a little up here for Ireland. And the last one, the UK, I'm going to do in blue. So what's the value of this? What's interesting or what's valuable about this tool? Have a think. Taylor, what do you reckon is interesting about this tool?
You can compare the different topics to each other to see which one has got the highest numbers.
Very good. So we've got, this is some pretty big data. This is people being born, the number of people being born in various countries over the span of 60 years. So there's a bit in that. And we can very quickly, I can show this to you, you have no idea what's happening in 1950, but I can put this graph up on the board and you can get some access to that. You have a very quick ability to read what's going on. So what are some things that we see? When we look at this graph, what's some stuff that we're picking out? Angus?
That UK had a big peak in birth rates in the 60s.
So just the UK?
UK and Ireland.
So the UK and Ireland, it's a good point. So UK and Ireland increase in birth rate in the 60s. That's an observation. Then what can we do with that? What can we do with an observation like that? We can investigate that further and say, why is that happening? What's going on in the 60s in the UK, in Ireland, that's causing this birth rate to increase? Have TV stopped working for 10 years or something? I don't know. What else do we look at? What else do we look at?
Is Alexa's dying here?
Shall we just stop and check the article?
Check the RPC.
China's birth rates have increased over the course of 60 years.
So that's a pretty big one, isn't it? We consider China has significant reduction. At what time?
70s.
So at 75. Between 70 and 74, between 70 to 75, there's a big reduction. That keeps going, doesn't it? Yeah. And again, we say, well, there must be something going on there. Because within a 10-year period, the average woman went from having over 5 kids. So the average person, if I walked into the average class here, I would say you've got 4 siblings at home, the average kid. That'd be a normal classroom in 1970. And then you go to a classroom 10 years later, and the normal classroom has got now two siblings. So you've nearly halved the size of the family in 10-year period. So we say, well, there's got to be something going on there, and we'll elaborate on that further. What else do we notice? Because I see something else when I look at this graph. UK is low the whole way through. So the UK is almost always, right until the last bit, The UK is lower.
Yeah.
They all like level out.
They all level out to around what number?
One.
3.32.
Yeah.
So here's an interesting thing. What happens when that number goes below 2? When that number goes below 2, what's happening? What's happening to the population of that country?
Decreasing.
It's decreasing. So anytime your value is above 2, it's increasing. Anytime your value is below 2, it is decreasing. Now let's unpack. Like I said, the value of this has allowed us to see some pretty amazing things about this. Like I said, this is big data. This is beyond you and me. Like, this is not just anecdotal, go to the shops. This is what's going on inside the average household. What can you see about the 1950s? Was life similar regardless of where you were? Or was it pretty different?
Pretty different.
I can imagine life would be very different for a person who's having 6 kids on average to one that's having 2 kids on average. Very different sort of lifestyle, correct? What about now? Much more similar than it was, correct? There would still be differences amongst these countries, but it's much more similar. What do we notice about China, specifically over its journey, like in this period here? What's happened?
Levels are gone.
Tell us.
Possibly the population has increased.
The population has definitely decreased, decreasing, or it hasn't actually decreased, but it's not growing anymore. Mason said something before about why they did that, or a policy that helped cause that. Yeah, so they brought in tough financial penalties as a way to curb, because massive population and the population was becoming too significant for them to be able to manage. So they brought in rules surrounding the number of children people could have without being taxed, and that caused the numbers to drop. So that explains a bit of what's going on in here. I don't know what's going on with the UK, but what can you do?
I think the UK is just sensible. They didn't have a lot of kids.
Interesting. What Angus is saying about being sensible, that probably has something to do with it. When you say sensible, it's that what was happening in the 70s and the 60s and the 50s regarding information? Was there less or more information? Probably less information, less of an attitude around keeping people informed. We can unpack a whole bunch of stuff in that, and that's just one set of data. So just by looking at one graph, you can see a whole snapshot of what's going on inside the world. That's just one graph. What does that say about how income is going? What do we think? Do we think that having high numbers of children represents a high socioeconomic or a low socioeconomic?
Well, would it be hard
Yeah,
if you
spend
can
more money.
support 6 children?
I
Yeah.
don't know. Well, you should.
There's a lot of groceries.
Maybe it's trying to rebalance the level of lunch.
Oh, there's they also did like a farming stuff. They were planting food.
Exactly. There's plenty to unpack there. The data might suggest that as income goes up and as you earn more money, the number of children you have tends to decrease. But it's an interesting argument. So does that mean that in Australia, if you've got lots of kids, therefore you're not well off? It doesn't mean that at all. But it's a trend in the data. Cool? So that's one graph. The next graph we're looking at is what's the next graph?
Average life expectancy in Germany, Iraq, and the UK.
So we're looking at life expectancy now, but when we look at the data, before we even start, let's look at the data.
These are blanks.
Yeah, there are lots of blanks. Why do you reckon there are blanks there? Where are the blanks?
They didn't do a census.
They didn't do a census. It'd be hard to get data on certain countries, wouldn't it?
Yeah,
And at
there's
certain
no
times. It'd be very hard. What do you notice about the 1900s?
There's no information.
No information for Iraq until the 1940s. So you're still going to do a graph like this, but what's going to happen with Iraq?
It's not going to be there.
It's not going to start until we get to the 40s, correct? What else do we notice about? Look at the numbers. Look at the numbers.
They started now.
So they started in the 1900s, but what about the average age?
They start like
Look at the life expectancy.
They don't get lower or higher. They get increases.
How does that happen? Is it the same for every country?
No.
So we can look at, so like, again, you look at this data, and when you plot this out, you'll be able to say, well, how is every country's journey to life expectancy gone? Where are we at now? What do you expect now? If you were to look at, without looking at the data, what would you expect now about life expectancy in Germany, UK, and Iraq? Which one would you expect to be the lowest? Which one do you expect to be the highest? Would you have expected there to be a straight line, so they're just getting better every year?
Yep.
No.
Or are there going to be things along the way that significantly increase? What about the impact of things like a war? What might that do to a life expectancy? I
Yeah,
don't know.
not made for a rock probably because they like have a lot of.
Are you sure? I think there's more prominent data about war on another country, but I'll leave you to figure that out.